My name is Nadia Osei-Mensah. I am 34 years old, and last Saturday I stood at the front of a banquet hall in Fairfield, Connecticut, population 61,000, wearing a dress that cost me 4 months of careful saving, holding a microphone that nobody had given me permission to hold. There were 218 people in that room. Every single one of them went completely silent. My husband Marcus was standing 12 feet away. His face had gone the particular shade of pale that people go when they realize something is about to happen that cannot be undone. His mother, Diane Hollister Webb, was seated at the head table in a cream-colored suit that I'll tell you more about in a moment, because the suit is important. His father was frozen mid-bite. And my parents, my mother, Abena, and my father, Kofi, were standing against the far wall of that room. Not seated, standing. Because as of 40 minutes earlier, their table assignments had been quietly, efficiently, and deliberately erased. I'll tell you what I said into that microphone, but first I need to take you back to where this actually started. Because what happened at that wedding was not the beginning of anything. It was the end of something that had been building for 3 years, and once you understand what I'd already survived to get to that altar, what I'd already swallowed, what I'd already watched happen to the 2 people who raised me, you'll understand exactly why I did not put that microphone down. Before I get into the part where everything breaks open, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story is already doing something to your chest. Drop your city in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. I want to know who's in the room with me. Let me take you back to summer 2021, Wethersfield, Connecticut. Population 26,000. The kind of town where the elementary school newsletter still refers to the fall festival as a harvest jamboree, and nobody seems to find that strange. I had been dating Marcus Hollister for 11 months. He was kind, steady, and funnier than he looked, which was something because he was also very handsome. He worked in commercial real estate. I was 3 years into a career in hospital administration, managing operations for a mid-sized clinic in Hartford. We had met at a mutual friend's birthday dinner and had been inseparable, more or less, since February of 2020, which meant that our relationship had been forged during a pandemic, over video calls and long walks and the specific intimacy of having no one else to talk to. By summer 2021, I had met his family 3 times. His mother, Diane Hollister Webb, his father, Gerald Hollister, his older sister, Whitney Hollister Price, and various aunts, cousins, and in-laws who circled the family nucleus with a particular orbit of people who understand exactly which gravitational force is holding everything together. The first time I met Diane, she told me I had such an interesting face. She said it the way people say a dish is interesting when they mean they would not order it again. I noted it, filed it, kept moving. The second time she asked me, and I want you to hear the specific words, she asked me, "What is it that your family does exactly?" My father is a retired civil engineer who helped design 3 bridges in the state of Ghana before immigrating. My mother taught middle school mathematics for 22 years. I told Diane this. She nodded and said, "How wonderful. So they must be very proud of you for going into healthcare." As if healthcare were a step down, as if it were a consolation prize. I noted it, filed it, kept moving. The third time I met Diane was at the Hollisters' 4th of July party at their house on Pequot Avenue. A white colonial with black shutters and a hydrangea border that Diane pruned herself because, as she explained 3 times that afternoon, she did not trust a gardener to understand her vision. Marcus and I arrived at noon. My parents had been invited. Diane had extended the invitation herself in a handwritten note on cream stationery, cream, always cream, that she sent to my parents' home address in New Britain. My mother had been genuinely touched by it. She'd shown me the note in the kitchen, holding it with 2 hands. We arrived together, my family and I. My mother had made her famous jollof rice, a dish that takes 6 hours and produces a smell that I associate in my body with every birthday and Christmas and first day of school I have ever had. She had brought it in a covered dish wrapped in a towel to keep it warm. Diane met us at the door in white linen. She looked at my mother's dish. She said, "Oh, how sweet. I'll find a place for it." She put it on the folding table by the garage. The same table where someone had deposited a flat of unopened water bottles and a bag of paper plates. My mother said nothing. Her face did not change. She has a face that has been trained over decades to not change. I looked at my father. He was watching my mother the way he always watches her in difficult moments. Steady, close, ready. Marcus's cousin, Blake Hollister, was standing nearby. He saw the whole thing. He looked at his shoes. Marcus's sister Whitney saw it too. She was holding a gin and tonic and she turned slightly to the left, which was in the direction of the lawn, and began discussing something with someone about the weather. My mother's jollof rice sat on that folding table for the entire afternoon. People walked past it. Nobody touched it. Diane served a catered spread from a company called Vine Tea Table, $15 a head minimum, and my mother's dish sat there in its towel like something nobody had claimed. At 4:30, I went to the garage table, picked up the dish, brought it inside, removed the lid, and set it on the buffet table next to the catered potato salad. Within 20 minutes, it was gone. Every single bite. Marcus's uncle, Harvey Price, found me later and said, "What was that rice dish? That was extraordinary." I told him my mother made it. He said, "I have to get that recipe." I said, "You'd have to ask her yourself. She's over there." He didn't go over, just let that sit. The engagement happened in October 2022. Marcus proposed at a restaurant called Millwrights in Simsbury. White tablecloths, candlelight, river views. And I said yes, and I meant it completely. What followed was 18 months of wedding planning that I will describe to you as accurately as I can, which means I will describe it as a slow, coordinated, beautifully performed erasure. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing about this particular kind of manipulation. It never does. It works in increments. A suggestion here, a concern there, a tilted head, a carefully placed pause, a sentence that begins with, "I just want to make sure you've considered." The venue was the first thing. Marcus and I had agreed on a small ceremony, maybe 80 people, at an outdoor space in Farmington that I had fallen in love with. Open sky, string lights, picnic tables, a barn for dancing. Diane sat us down in the living room of the Pequot Avenue house in January 2023 and presented, without any prior discussion, a full spreadsheet of alternative venues. She had printed it in color. There was a column for capacity, a column for parking, and a column she had labeled appropriate for the occasion. The Farmington barn was not on the list. She said, "I just want to make sure Marcus's grandmother can attend comfortably. The barn has uneven flooring, and at 87 she really needs..." Marcus's grandmother, I'll note, had attended a camping trip in Vermont the previous August. She was fine, but the sentence had done its work. It was no longer about what Diane wanted. It was about Grandma Ethel's safety. And what kind of person argues against a grandmother's safety? Marcus looked at me across the living room. His expression said, "I know what's happening. I'm sorry. I don't know how to stop it. That look. I'll come back to that look." We booked the Fairfield Grand, a ballroom venue on Post Road that held 250 guests and cost us $34,000 for the space alone, not including catering. It was not what I had wanted. It was beautiful in the way of things that are designed to be beautiful for everyone and therefore for no one in particular. The guest list was next. I want to be precise here. I had submitted a list of 62 people I wanted to invite. My family, extended Ghanaian family, family friends, my parents' community from New Britain, accounted for 41 of those names. 6 weeks before the wedding, I received an email from the venue's event coordinator, not from Diane, from the venue, informing me that the final guest count had been adjusted to 218 and asking me to confirm final dietary restrictions by Friday. I had not been part of that adjustment. I found out when I sat down with Marcus that night that Diane had expanded the invitation list by 94 people. Gerald's business associates, Whitney's school friends, Diane's church committee, her book club, her garden club. People who had never met me. People who would never meet me again after that day. My 41 family names had been reduced to 27. Specific people had been removed. Diane had sent regret cards on my behalf. On my behalf. Marcus and I had the hardest conversation of our relationship that night. It lasted 4 hours. He cried. I did not in front of him. I kept my voice level. I laid out what had happened, with the precision I use at work when I am managing a complicated situation that requires everybody in the room to understand what is actually occurring. At the end of the conversation, Marcus called his mother. The call lasted 17 minutes. When he hung up, he said, "She said she was just trying to help." I said, "I know she did." And then I said, "The 27 names from my family, will you make sure they are at the main tables, not in the back corner, not near the kitchen, at the main tables?" He said, "Absolutely, I'll take care of it personally." I believed him. I want to be clear, I believed him. Pause. The night before the wedding, Diane called Marcus at 11:45 p.m. I was lying next to him. I heard his side of the conversation, short, accommodating, the particular register he uses when he is managing her rather than speaking to her. When he hung up, he said the call was about the morning timeline, about what time the shuttle would arrive for the elderly guests. It was not about the shuttle. I'll tell you what it was actually about in a moment, because I only found out the following day, when I arrived at the venue, and the seating chart had been changed. What I did not yet know was that the small wooden box, the one I had packed in the bottom of my overnight bag 2 days before the wedding, the one I had been carrying from apartment to apartment for 3 years without ever opening. That box was about to matter more than I had allowed myself to admit. I want to stop here and give you something that the beginning of this story might not have prepared you for. I need to tell you about the 4 years before Marcus, because the reason I was so careful, so measured, so committed to keeping my voice level in that living room, the reason I did not flinch when the jollof rice was put on the folding table, is that I had already lived through something that made this look, if not manageable, then at least survivable. I'll tell you now so you understand the full picture. When I was 23 years old, I left a job. Not just a job, a situation. I had graduated from UConn in May 2013 with a degree in health sciences and accepted a position at a nonprofit healthcare organization in Bridgeport. It was an entry-level role. The salary was $31,000 a year. I was the youngest person on the team and one of very few Black women in a leadership pipeline that was, for all practical purposes, designed to run people like me through it and deposit us somewhere lateral. My direct supervisor was a woman named Carol Tremaine. Carol was 51, capable, well-liked, and constitutionally unable to credit ideas that did not originate with her. In my first year, I proposed a patient intake redesign that reduced average wait time by 11 minutes per appointment. Carol presented it at a quarterly meeting. She mentioned my name once. She mentioned her own name 7 times. I noted it, filed it, kept moving. In my second year, I was passed over for a team lead promotion that was given to a man named Derek Cass, who had been hired 4 months after me and who, as far as I could observe, had not redesigned anything. When I asked Carol for feedback, she said, "You have so much potential, Nadia. We just need to make sure you're ready for the visibility." She said it warmly. She tilted her head. I quit on a Tuesday in March 2015, which was a cold, bright day, the kind of cold that has no sympathy for you. I had $4,200 in savings, no other job offer, and a lease I had to find a way to break. I moved into a house share in New Haven, 6 people, 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, $430 a month. The hallway always smelled like the same vanilla candle somebody had been burning for years. I worked 31 hours a week at a medical billing office and used every other hour to finish a post-baccalaureate program in healthcare management at Southern Connecticut State. I ate a lot of rice and frozen vegetables that year. I slept with a textbook open on my chest more nights than I can count. I did not go home very often because going home meant questions I didn't have answers to yet, and I didn't have the energy to perform certainty I didn't feel. The first person outside my family who treated me like I knew what I was doing was a woman named Dr. Patricia Yoon. She was the director of operations at a clinic in Hartford. She had interviewed me for an administrative coordinator role, and at the end of the interview, looked at my resume for a long moment and then said, "You redesigned a patient intake system at 23? I said, "Yes." She said, "And they promoted Derek Cass?" I said, "They did." She said, "Start Monday." Patricia did not coddle me. She assigned me the most complicated operational problems she had and then watched to see what I did with them. What she told me once was this: the fact that you grew up watching people underestimate you means you check things twice. That's not a disadvantage. That's a skill you paid for. She was the first mentor I had who named what I had lived through as an asset rather than a scar. There was a woman at that clinic, a patient coordinator named Simona Chebe, who became my closest friend over the following 3 years. She had grown up in a Haitian family in Bridgeport that had its own version of the erasure I knew. A different texture, the same mechanism. We didn't talk about it much. We talked about work and about food and about the specific comedy of being underestimated in high-stakes rooms. We laughed more than we talked about anything hard. The laughing was the bond. But there are costs to the version of survival I was practicing that don't show up on a resume. When I left the nonprofit in 2015, I had no one at work who could serve as an emergency contact. I moved 3 times in 4 years without anyone sending me a card. There was a period, 8 months, between late 2016 and mid-2017, where I was aware, in the background of every day, that someone was telling a story about me. Carol Tremaine, specifically. I could feel it in the way certain professional doors seemed stuck. I could not correct a story I could not hear, no birthday calls, no Christmas morning person to text. I learned to build the scaffolding of a life out of what was available, which turns out to be more than people think. And then, in April 2018, I woke up on a Tuesday morning in my own apartment on Asylum Avenue in Hartford. The faucet in the bathroom dripped exactly twice every minute. I'd been meaning to fix it for weeks. I woke up at 6:12 a.m. and it dripped twice, and I lay there and realized I had not heard Diane Hollister's voice in my head when I fell asleep the previous night. That was not Diane's voice. That was Carol Tremaine's. But the silence was the same. The silence was a beginning. If you're still here, and I hope you are, hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to get a lot more complicated, and I want you to have the full picture before you decide how you feel about what I did next. There was no montage, just alarm clocks and spreadsheets and falling asleep with a textbook open on my chest. By 2019, I was managing operations for 3 clinical departments at the Hartford Clinic. By 2020, Patricia had recommended me for a leadership fellowship through the Connecticut Hospital Association that I did not get. I applied again the following year. I got it on the second attempt. By 2021, when I met Marcus, I was making $78,000 a year, had $22,000 in savings, and had, in the previous 6 months, streamlined a patient triage process that had reduced emergency escalations by 14A. I did not think of myself as someone who had made it. I'm still not sure what that phrase means. I thought of myself as someone who had gotten very good at building systems in environments that were not designed to support her. The fellowship changed things. I was in a cohort of 12 healthcare administrators from across New England. One of them was a woman named Josephine Tran, who ran behavioral health programming for a hospital network in Providence, Rhode Island. She was 41. She had, as far as I could tell, no interest in being impressive, and was therefore one of the most impressive people I had encountered in any professional setting. On the 3rd day of the fellowship, we were assigned a case study about a hospital merger that had gone badly. Everyone was analyzing the structural failures, the board decisions, the financial projections. Josephine leaned over to me and said quietly, "They lost it at the culture audit. Nobody listened to the nurses." I said, "Nobody ever listens to the nurses." She looked at me. "Is that your experience or your observation?" I said, "Both." She said, "That's actually the more useful data." We ate dinner together after that session. We did not talk about our families. We talked about systems, what makes one break, what makes another hold. She had a quiet way of asking questions that made you feel like your answers were being taken seriously rather than evaluated. We had been through different specific things and the same general thing, and we both knew it without having to name it. The object of deferred meaning, the small wooden box. I'll tell you what was inside it now because you need to know before we get to the night before the wedding. The box was my father's. He had given it to me in 2015, just before I left for New Haven. It was dark walnut, about the size of a hardcover book with a brass latch. He gave it to me and said, "Don't open it until you feel like you know who you are." I carried it to 3 apartments. I put it in the bottom of every overnight bag I packed. It went with me to the fellowship. It went with me to Marcus's apartment on the first night I slept over. I had never opened it. The night before the wedding, before Diane called at 11:45, before Marcus had the phone conversation I couldn't hear, I was alone in the bridal suite at the Fairfield Grand. The hotel had given me the room the night before as part of the package. 1,200 square feet, a clawfoot tub I didn't use, floor-to-ceiling windows facing the parking lot. I took the box out of my overnight bag. I put it on the desk by the window. I sat in front of it for 7 minutes. I opened it. Inside was a letter. 4 pages, handwritten in my father's careful engineering school script. It was dated March 15, 2015, the exact week I quit the nonprofit and told my parents I was moving to New Haven to start over. He had written about the first year he and my mother spent in Hartford after immigrating. He had written about the specific feeling of having your credentials treated as suspect by people with less expertise and more certainty. He had written about the mornings, and there were many of them, when the loudest voice in the room was someone trying to convince him that he was smaller than he was. And then he had written this. I have the letter. I know it by heart now. He wrote, "The people who are loudest about who you are have always been the ones who are afraid of what you might become. Do not give them the volume. Build something quiet and enormous and let it speak in your place." I sat at that desk for a long time after I read it. I was not thinking about Diane yet. I was thinking about my father in 1987 sitting across a conference table from someone who was using a polite tone to tell him that his qualifications were interesting. I was thinking about my mother putting jollof rice on a folding table in a garage and saying nothing. I was thinking about all the moments when the people who made me had chosen silence as a form of survival rather than defeat. Pause. My phone buzzed at 11:45. Marcus answered his phone beside me. I lay still and listened to his side of the conversation, and I knew, not yet completely, but in the way that the body knows things before the mind will admit them, that something had been changed. Something had been moved without my consent. I did not say anything. I kissed Marcus goodnight. I waited until his breathing evened, and then I lay in the dark with my father's letter on the desk across the room, and I made a decision, not about what I would do. I didn't know yet what I would do. I made a decision about what I would not accept. I arrived at the Fairfield Grand at 10 a.m. on the morning of my wedding. My mother and father arrived at 10:15. My mother was in a deep green dress the color of something living. My father wore a suit he had pressed himself the night before. They were, as they always are in public, beautiful and careful and exact. The venue coordinator met us in the lobby. Her name was Trish Callahan. She was efficient and visibly uncomfortable. She handed me a printed seating chart. I looked at it for 30 seconds. The head table, the table directly in front of the dance floor, the table with the floral centerpiece that took up 18 inches of surface space and had been selected from a vendor I had never spoken to, was now composed entirely of Hollister family members and their immediate spouses. My parents had been moved. Not to a bad table, that's not the right word for it. They had been moved to table 9, which was near the windows, fine, pleasant windows, and seated with 3 of Diane's book club members and a couple I did not recognize. The table where my parents were supposed to sit, the table Marcus had promised me, the table to the immediate left of the head table, had been given to Gerald's business partners and their wives. My mother looked at the seating chart over my shoulder. She said nothing. Her face did not change. My father put his hand on her back. One hand. Steady. I looked at Trish Callahan. I said, "Who approved this revision?" She said, "Mrs. Hollister submitted the updated chart on Thursday evening." Thursday evening, the night before my wedding, the 11:45 p.m. phone call, not about the shuttle, about this. I said, "Thank you, Trish." She looked relieved that I wasn't louder. I had a conversation with Marcus in the hallway outside the bridal suite. A short one. I told him exactly what I had found and exactly what I believed had happened. He confirmed it, quietly, without defending it, and said, "I'm sorry, Nadia. I didn't know until this morning, and I didn't know how to—" I said, "It's okay." He looked at me in the specific way that meant he knew it was not okay, and he was grateful I was not making it worse. I said, "I need you to be at my side today, Marcus. I need you to not manage your mother. I need you to be completely present. Can you do that?" He said, "Yes." We got married at 2 p.m. The ceremony was at a small chapel space on the venue's second floor. It was short and it was real. The officiant was a friend of ours, a woman named Leslie Osei Boteng, who had known me since college. My parents walked me down the aisle, one on each side, because that is the tradition in my family. Diane sat in the front row across the aisle. I saw her eyes move to my parents. I saw the slight rearrangement of her expression, not hostile, nothing as clear as that, more like a calculation, an adjustment. The ceremony was ours. Everything inside the ceremony was ours. The reception is where it changed. At 6 p.m., during cocktail hour, I walked through the ballroom and checked table 9. My parents were standing near it, not seated, standing, because 3 of the book club women had arrived and taken the seats that should have been theirs, and the table had only been set for 8, and there were 11 people now expected at it, and no one from the venue had been alerted because no one from the Hollister coordination side had accounted for my parents when the revision was made. My parents were standing against the wall of my wedding reception in their good clothes. My father had his hands clasped in front of him the way he stands when he is being very patient. I saw this from across the room. I turned around. I walked to the front of the room. I found the venue's audio technician. I asked him for the microphone. He said, "Ma'am, the toasts aren't until after dinner." I said, "I know, I need the microphone now." He looked at me for a moment. Then he handed it to me. The room was mid-cocktail hour, the specific warmth of 200 people with drinks in their hands and nowhere to be. Someone was playing a jazz standard. The florist had done extraordinary work on the centerpieces. The light was golden. I walked to the center of the room. I tapped the microphone once. The sound carried. 218 people turned. Diane was at the head table, standing, speaking to Gerald's business partner's wife, a woman named Sandra Pfeiffer, who would, I realized later, have a complicated 3 days processing what she was about to witness. At the sound of the microphone, Diane turned. I will describe her face at the moment she saw me. Her mouth was mid-word. The words stopped. Her eyes did the specific thing that they do. The rapid social calculation, the instant check of who is watching and what do they see. Her first movement was not toward me. It was a slight pivot, a small adjustment of her shoulders, a repositioning of her champagne glass. She was, in that fraction of a second, managing her audience before she had any idea what she needed to manage them for. I noted it. For the last time, I said into the microphone, "I'm sorry to interrupt the cocktail hour. I promise this will be brief." The room had the quality of a room that is already listening. I said, "My name is Nadia. Today, I married a person I love very much in a room full of people who drove here from many different places to witness that. And I am grateful for every single one of you." I paused. I said, there are 2 people in this room who drove 2 hours this week to drop off flowers for the centerpieces, because I mentioned once 3 years ago that my grandmother grew gardenias and I missed them. There are 2 people in this room who, when I was building something out of almost nothing in 2015, called me every Sunday at 8 p.m. without fail, for 2 years until I asked them to stop because I was finally okay. There are 2 people in this room who ironed a suit last night and pressed a dress and drove here today to watch their daughter get married. And they are currently standing against the far wall because their seats were not waiting for them. I did not look at Diane. I said, so I'd like to take a moment to ask Mr. Kofi Osei-Mensah and Mrs. Abena Osei-Mensah to please come to the head table. We have 2 seats there that are exactly right for them. Marcus was 12 feet away. His face had gone very still. His eyes were wet. Later, he would tell me that, in that moment, he felt something that he couldn't entirely name. Something like, this is the person I married. My parents walked across that room. The sound that went through 200 people as they walked was not applause exactly. It was something more involuntary than applause. Someone near the back started clapping first. Then it moved through the room like weather. My mother reached me. Her face, that face I know better than any face in the world, had finally changed. Her eyes were full. She put her hand on my arm. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I handed the microphone back to the audio technician. I said quietly, thank you. He said, that was something. I found 2 seats at the head table. Gerald's business partner and his wife relocated graciously without being asked twice. I sat my parents down. My mother had her back straight and her chin level, the way she sits when she is somewhere she knows she belongs. 45 minutes later, Diane found me near the bar. She said, that was quite a speech, Nadia. Her voice was very even. She was smiling in the way that carries no warmth. I said, thank you. She said, I hope you didn't mean for it to come across as an accusation. I said, I didn't accuse anyone of anything. She said, I only moved the seating because Grandma Ethel needed to be near the exit. I said, Diane, I know. There was a beat. She said, Marcus's father is upset. I said, I understand. Whitney appeared at her mother's elbow. She said, maybe this isn't the time. I looked at Whitney. I said, I agree. Gerald materialized. He said, Nadia, I think we all just want a good evening. I said, so do I. Then I looked at each of them. Diane, Whitney, Gerald, in turn. 1 sentence each, clear. Not raised, not repeated to Gerald. I know you worked very hard on this event, and I see that. To Whitney, I've always hoped we could be closer than we've been. To Diane, I will not be asking you to change who you are. I am asking you to accept who I am. Then I walked back to my husband, even, steady. No slamming. That night from the bridal suite, I sent 1 email to Marcus, CC'd to Diane and Gerald. It was 4 paragraphs. It named the specific actions: the seating revision, the guest list expansion, the dish at the garage table, the pattern I had been observing for 3 years, without using a single adjective that could be argued with. It was factual the way a spreadsheet is factual. It named in the final paragraph what I would not participate in going forward. And it named, in 1 sentence at the very end, the door I was willing to leave open: family counseling with a therapist of neutral selection, if everyone was willing. Then I put down my phone. Then I slept for 9 hours, deeply, with my husband's arm across my back, and I did not dream about any of them. What happened next, I did not orchestrate. I want to be precise about that. The video of my speech at the microphone was filmed by at least 3 separate guests. The first clip, 47 seconds, shot on someone's iPhone, capturing my voice and the walk my parents made across the ballroom, was sent in a group text within hours. By Sunday morning, it had been shared outside the original group. By Monday, it had reached people who had not been at my wedding. Diane's garden club president, a woman named Florence Aldrich Hall, called Diane that Monday to say she had seen the video. I know this because Marcus told me, and Marcus knew it because Gerald told him, in a conversation that lasted 1 hour and 40 minutes, and that Marcus recapped to me with the expression of someone who has just survived a complicated piece of weather. The book club, Diane's Wednesday book club. 4 women who had been meeting at the Pequot Avenue house for 11 years did not meet the following Wednesday, or the one after. One of them, a woman named Patricia Devereaux, sent me a direct message through Instagram that said only, I saw the video, I've been at that table, I understand. I did not reply. I saved it. The consequence I had not anticipated, Diane had, for the previous 3 years, served as the volunteer hospitality coordinator for her church's annual gala. It was a role she had held for 7 consecutive years. The church's events committee meets in September. In September, for the first time in 7 years, she was not asked to reprise the role. I did not know about this until November. I did not feel triumph when I learned it. I felt something quieter and less comfortable than triumph, a kind of recognition that the mechanism had worked in both directions, that the same social capital she had used to arrange and rearrange my life had been subject to its own audit. Gerald came to me in September with a phone call that lasted 22 minutes. He spoke carefully, more carefully than I had heard him speak before, about how he had not perhaps been paying close enough attention. He did not say Diane's name. He did not say the word wrong. But he said twice that he thought Marcus had married very well, and each time he said it, it sounded slightly more like an apology and slightly less like a compliment. It was not enough to repair anything. It was not nothing either. Whitney sent a text in October. It said, "I didn't say anything when I should have. I know that. I don't know how to fix it. I'm not asking you to." I read it 4 times. I have not yet responded. The door is still ajar. Blake Hollister, Marcus's cousin, the one who had looked at his shoes in the garage while my mother's dish sat in its towel. He came up to me at a family birthday event in November and said without preamble, I should have said something. He said nothing else. He didn't need to. I said, I know. We stood there for a moment. Then someone called him from across the room and he went. I stayed where I was and let the moment settle. In January of this year, I established a small fund through my hospital's community outreach department. It provides one $3,000 annual scholarship to a first-generation immigrant woman pursuing graduate-level credentials in healthcare administration at a Connecticut institution. The scholarship is named the Abena and Kofi Osei Mensah Fellowship. I did not make an announcement about it. I filed the paperwork, transferred the initial capital from my savings, and told my parents over dinner at their house in New Britain. Spaghetti, because my mother has always refused to accept that spaghetti is an inadequate Sunday dinner, and she has always been right. My father put his fork down when I told him. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Is it enough?" I said, "It's a start." He said, "Good, keep going." My mother said nothing. She got up and refilled my glass of water. When she sat back down, her hand rested on mine for exactly 3 seconds. Then she picked her fork back up and told us about a student she'd had in 1998 who had just become a pediatric cardiologist in Boston. And the evening continued. Last Thursday night, Marcus and I had dinner at our apartment in Hartford with Simone Achebe and her husband Derek and my parents and Josephine Tran, who had driven down from Providence because she happened to be in New Haven for work and it would be a waste not to. Simone made pickles. Josephine brought wine from a vineyard she'd never heard of and therefore trusted entirely. My mother brought jollof rice in the covered dish wrapped in a towel the way she always has. We ate from plates that did not match. Marcus's wine glass was a burgundy glass. Mine was a juice glass because we've been meaning to replace the set. The table in our dining room fits 6 people if everyone is comfortable with their elbows touching, which on this particular night everyone was. At some point, 9:30 or so, the dishes cleared, the wine nearly gone, my mother started telling the story about the camping trip my father had taken in 1992 that he is deeply embarrassed by. My father began interrupting. Simone began laughing before the story was even finished. Josephine leaned forward on her elbows. Marcus was sitting next to me and his knee was against mine under the table and his hand was in my hand. I looked at my mother. She was mid-story, her hands moving the way they do when she is performing a scene. She was lit up. She was not standing against a wall. She was not watching her dish go untouched. She was here, in the room, at the center of it. I thought of the house on Pequot Avenue. The catered spread, the cream stationery, the hydrangea border. I looked at our mismatched plates. I thought, this is the table. If you're still listening, I want to say something directly to you. Not to everyone. To the specific person who has been sitting with something uncomfortable while this story was playing. The one who knows what it feels like to have your people quietly repositioned. The one who has watched something that was yours get reorganized by someone who smiled while they did it. There are words they use. Maybe you've heard them. Sensitive. Difficult. Can't you just let it go? You always have to make everything about you. I was just trying to help. These words are not descriptions. They are instruments. They are the sound of someone trying to maintain control of a story they were never entitled to tell. When you refuse to shrink, when you name what is happening with precision instead of volume, when you pick up the microphone and say plainly what is true, that is not making a scene. That is the only power worth having, the power of clarity. And here is the thing about the people who tell you that you're too much. They are not wrong about your size. They are wrong about whether your size is a problem. It is not a problem. It is the whole point. My parents walked across a ballroom on my wedding day in their good clothes, and 200 people made room for them because someone finally said what was true. That is not drama. That is what happens when you stop organizing yourself around someone else's comfort. You do not need to be loud. You need to be precise. You need to be willing to name the thing and stand behind the naming. Build something quiet and enormous and let it speak in your place. My father wrote that. He was right. Here is what I want to ask you. And I want you to actually think about it before you answer. If the people who repositioned you, who moved your table, who put your dish by the garage, who quietly subtracted your name from the list, if they called you tomorrow after years of everything, what do you think they would say first? I need something from you. Or, I'm sorry. Think about which one you believe. Then drop it in the comments. I read every single one, and I mean that. If you want to hear more stories like this one, stories from the other side of the silence, there are more of them on this channel. Every one of them is true. Every one of them is told from the place I am standing now, which is the good side of a very long walk. Thank you for listening tonight. I'll see you in the next one.